Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in Regijska. I've never been before, and what I could see from my window this morning was very beautiful. And I'd like to thank the Slovenian Association for Adult Education and the National Agency for Erasmus Plus for the invitation and for giving us the opportunity to give you our view on where adult learning policy is and where we situate it within the broader context of education and training policy at European level. I'd just like to start by sort of recapping a bit on the big objectives, if you like, because the European Agenda for Adult Learning is part of the Education and Training 2020 process, and we hope that, of course, in the coming months and in the coming year that we're going to renew this process. So it's actually very good that we meet and discuss, what are the priorities for the future and how do we get the work that we've started to continue and to progress. So, of course, making lifelong learning a reality is still the big issue, and also under the Finnish presidency of the EU now that is really back on the table. And of course, adult learning is the part that we haven't yet got right, because we have over 90% of young people in early childhood education. School education is developing. Lots of countries are developing their VET systems. Of course, higher education is well developed in a lot of countries. But we still need to do a lot to give all adults the learning opportunities they're going to need in the future to deal with change, and change in society in particular, and not only change in the workplace. But even that, we haven't got enough training opportunities for all the employees to keep up to date with their skills. And so, of course, then equity and equality and cohesion and inclusion, these are all the key words that we have to think about in our work. And of course, this needs creativity and it needs innovation if we're to bring learning to more adults. And also opening up the environments where adults can learn, and not just trying to always bring them back to the classroom where, as the previous lady said, we have a busy life and we haven't got really time maybe for this. And then, of course, we really need data and we need monitoring of what we do to see how it's working and what is the impact on the learner, and whether or not we should actually change some of the things we do. And then, particular to the agenda for adult learning in all of this, of course, we've been, for the past 10 years now, I suppose, we've been looking at participation and trying to improve the rates. And it's difficult, but you do, now that the crisis is over in Europe, I think you do see that things are getting better, and you do see gradual progress in many countries. But there are still huge variations between the countries, and I'm sure you know that in the Scandinavian countries, up to 30% of the population, the adult population, can be learning at any time in the month previous to the labour force survey. But in some countries in Southern Europe, it might be down to 2%. So really learning from each other and trying to find out, what works and what are they doing that we could learn from, I guess, is one of the big issues. And that's also one of the objectives of the European cooperation in adult learning that we do around the agenda. So it's great to see not only Slovene colleagues here today, but also colleagues from the neighbouring countries, because I think that's really the spirit of the national coordination and cooperation. And of course, the other big challenge is that there's limited provision for adults, but especially the adults who need it most, the adults who are low qualified or who have low basic skills. And these are the ones that, through the agenda, we've been really trying to target. And that is why a lot of what I'm going to talk about is related to the initiative for these people and how we can give them more guidance and support and reach out to them and bring them into the learning opportunities. And I'd just like to mention one other big challenge that we have in the sector, and that is to motivate adults to learn, because not only are they busy, but they've also, maybe it's been a long time since they learned, they don't have the self-confidence perhaps to go back to a learning situation. But from the adult education survey, you can see that of the people who do not participate in learning, which is over 50% of the people in a year, in some countries it could be up to 60%, but the green part here, they did not want to take part. Even if you were going to offer them learning opportunities, they wouldn't have taken it up, or they wouldn't have seen any reason for taking it away. So I think this is what we have to keep in our minds when we're trying to develop our policies, develop our provision and guidance and outreach and so on. And then I'd just like to say that even though, some countries are doing well, they've got good provision and so on, but if you look all over Europe, there's still a problem with high numbers of adults between 25 and 64, but obviously the older you are in some countries, the less chance you have had of having a good education or training when you were a young person. So there's still a lot of work to be done throughout Europe in this area, and that's why this national coordination around the agenda and using the priorities of the agenda for mutual learning and cooperation, and to visit each other to see how other people are doing it. I mean, this is really key, I think. Just before I go on to the upskilling pathways, I'd like to take a glass of water. So it was with this group of low-qualified, low-skilled adults that we developed what was proposed in the New Skills Agenda as the Youth Guarantee, but which the Council then renamed as Upskilling Pathways, New Opportunities for Adults. So the whole idea is to give a coherent, rigorous learning opportunity to these people based on their experiences and based on the skills they have. So that's why it starts by suggesting that the individual should have a skills assessment to identify what these skills are. And then rather than sending them back to a course for 3 years or a course that's all day long or in the evenings or whatever, that the learning centre then tries to match the skills they have with a tailored opportunity for learning. So it might be a vocational course if they need a qualification for a job, but the skills assessment should also look at their basic skills and see, have they got the literacy skills to follow that course, or is their numeracy good enough to measure what they'll have to do in a carpentry course or something like that. And then, of course, today we consider that everybody needs digital skills, no matter what type of work or what they're going to do in life. And then it's also important to validate and to recognize the skills that they have and the skills that they continue to acquire. So the fact that a lot of countries are developing systems for the validation of non-formal and informal learning really helps this initiative as well. And it's also an opportunity to make sure that the validation procedures that are being set up in many countries don't just stay in higher education or in vocational training, that they also address adult learning. And to look then at how countries are implementing this, well, some of them have plans to embed it in wider strategies for lifelong learning, for example, or in Finland, in France at the moment, they had a huge investment program where they have over 15 billion euros that they're going to invest, half of it for young people, like the needs not in education, training or employment, and the other half then will go to the employed population and the unemployed adults who need upskilling. And then there are many countries who are building on measures that are already in force. For instance, in Portugal, they have had a tradition for some time of trying to upskill and offer qualifications to low-skilled adults. And then in many countries, of course, there are many routes or programs that do upskilling pathways partially, but perhaps I'll come back to that again. But then some countries are developing new pilots because, for instance, in the Czech Republic, education and training levels are quite high, but there's a need for digital skills. And so there's a special niche there for a dedicated pilot. Or setting new ambitions. I mean, the Netherlands does overall quite well, but it also realizes that there's a whole section of the population that's left behind. So it has now quite a structured offer of basic skills for adults, but it's also trying once again to make the lifelong learning system work. So it's putting its upskilling pathways into this context. And then how do we do this? As I said, there are many, the recommendation asks countries to build on what they have. So there are many measures in place that give maybe literacy or give digital skills or give vocational skills. But we really need some way of bringing them all together, especially if we're going to offer the tailored offer to the individual, where they might pick and choose from a variety of offers. So, wide coordination structures are being set up in a few countries, like Finland has a think tank where it looks at all the education and training, and it will also cover the upskilling pathways. Steering groups and working groups are probably the most usual, a dedicated group for that. And then in many countries, of course, the responsibility stays within the lead ministry, which is often the Ministry for Education, but in a few cases also the Ministry for Labour. And they take over the coordination. And of course, I'm happy to see that the national coordinators for adult learning are also playing a role in this, and in their current work programs, about 10 of them are supporting the implementation of upskilling pathways. And I was saying that it was up to each country to decide, are they going to address the whole adult population with low skills, or are they going to try and focus on one group? And this also, of course, varies from country to country, and some countries are trying to develop an offer that would be suitable for various kinds of target groups, which of course is quite helpful, or just citizens at large. But then there are another group of countries who have worked a lot on the youth guarantee, on the young adults not in education, training or employment. So of course they have some measures developed. So the trend now is for them to try and extend the age limit upwards. So Bulgaria, for instance, is trying to provide the youth guarantee offer now to people up to 30. And then there are a whole group of countries who are looking at the unemployed people who have low levels of qualifications, because of course the public employment services are already doing a lot to provide employability courses, to provide active labour market actions that will get a person back quickly into a job. But what they're maybe not doing is looking at whether or not this person has all the skills that they will need to maintain that job. So it is good that this group is also being looked at. And then, for instance, in Germany and in Ireland, but also in France, there's a big focus on people who are in employment already, but whose jobs might be at risk because they're doing a particular function now, but if they become unemployed and if they go out into the job market, or if they go to look for training to help them change, then they haven't really got a good set of basic skills and key competences to do that. And this is particularly a problem in small and medium-sized enterprises. And then, of course, there are another group of countries who are looking at older people, people who, for their livelihood or for their well-being or whatever, might like to stay on in employment, or to continue to work half-time or something. And of course, these people are also target groups. And then on the other side, you have got lots of specific groups. And of course, it's good that the countries have mapped all these initiatives, but really the challenge now is to bring them all together and to develop something that is coherent, that will be available to an adult, be they a woman, be they in prison, be they a Roma, be they unemployed or of migrant origin or whatever, and that this is available on a regular basis and not just when there's money available maybe from the European Social Fund or something like that, which is behind a lot of these offers. And then, of course, the last one here, adult education staff and tutors, they're not a target group in the same sense, but of course the recommendation also asks for attention to their continuing professional development and their skills development as well, so they can be part of providing this flexible type of learning to adults. And regarding the three steps approach then, what we see is that the skills assessment part, it is being developed, for instance, as skills profiling or skills screening, it's often called as well, or just simply identifying gaps in basic skills. And Austria has, of course, been doing this for quite a while, but then Greece and Croatia and Italy are also developing this. And it's often done with the support of the public employment services. So if you're unemployed, you're more likely to get a skills profiling than you are if you're an employed person or if you're just out of the system and want to get back in. And regarding then the tailoring or making the learning more flexible, in most countries it's a set of parallel measures like that would represent, like all those target groups you saw. They're little programs or little pockets of money that are made available from time to time for one of these groups, but it's not a sort of coherent provision or system where a person can move. For instance, an unemployed person who's in a program and then they get a job. As often as not, they drop out of the training when they get the job, rather than move to continue their training or take the training with them. And this is what we mean by flexible, that it doesn't depend on the type of situation you're in, or that if you do, your circumstances do change, that your learning opportunity continues with you, or you can do it maybe as a distance learning course, or that some solution is found for you. So bringing flexibility into the system then is important. And I know here in Slovenia you've also been trying a lot of different, well, I suppose, experimentation. We're still probably in this experimentation phase. And then modularization, of course, is also being introduced in a lot of countries, because especially in vocational courses, where a person has worked for a long time, they may have a lot of the key competences for that job, but they may, the practical components they may have, but they may need more theoretical knowledge to support it. So it's important that the course, the parts of the course that the person would need would be available, but that they could also combine that with maybe digital skills or maybe numeracy skills or whatever they need. So flexible settings are also important, and of course you also have your lifelong learning centers here, but also in Poland they're developing centers for adults, and also Hungary and Ireland is more community learning, and that of course is also important. And the recognition then and the validation of non-formal and informal learning, this in many countries is important because they're also trying to introduce the recommendation on the validation of non-formal and informal learning. So there are developments going on in many countries. And this, however, is often very much linked then to bringing the qualifications in line with national qualification frameworks and the European qualifications framework, but also having it in line with, say, industrial standards if it's a vocational qualification. There are some developments in all countries, but I'm not sure that adult learning is being completely included in all of the procedures, let's say. And so if we look then at what countries said about the skills they're addressing, of course there was a big group that said that they really wanted to address numeracy and literacy, as you can see here. And then, of course, digital skills are also very important. But then when you look deeply at the kind of programs that are being given, you see that many of them are based on vocational skills, and many of them are vocational training courses, and then you wonder if the other basic skills are really embedded in these programs as they should be. So I think this is also part of the flexibility that's needed to make sure that it's not purely a vocational course to get you quickly into a job, but that also gives you the basic skills and key competences that you need to sustain that job when you're in it and to move on in your life. And as regards the support measures then, guidance is, especially if you are trying to work out a flexible pathway for yourself, or with the help of your training organization or adult education center, it's very important to have guidance about your choice, but then guiding you through, because when you try to pick the modules and pick the bits that you need, you probably need some help in that. And also because of the motivation issues and helping some of these adults that are struggling with learning along can be important, an important service that guidance could give. But guidance for the moment in many countries is provided in the public employment service, as I said, so it's mostly for unemployed people. And many employed people, if they wanted guidance, they would have to pay for it through a private guidance center. So this is an area really where attention is needed. And awareness and promotion is also actually often done a lot by public employment services, but of course also then by public bodies and by your ministries, of course, who are also doing a lot. And then, in fact, EPALE is probably, although it's a platform for professionals, it is becoming as well a platform for, well, certainly for information about awareness raising and for tools and events that you're doing that work. So it's really becoming an important source of information about such activities. And of course it is an electronic platform itself, so that's also good. And as regards the financial support then for these people, many of the programs that were reported on by member states are supported by the European social funds. So this means that they're quite short, they have quite a short life, because often when the funding runs out, they're discontinued. So we really need to get sustainable funding going at national level to continue these programs, or at least to continue some of them or elements of them, to get this coherent sort of service in place. So then the timeline, I mean, these reports were sent in by countries in 2018, and our policies are running out in 2020, and as are, of course, the funding systems, but then the funding that you get in 2020 will be still, you can still spend it till 22, possibly 23. So, you know, in this short term now, we really need to start working on sustainable funding and ways to support adults to learn. And I think a few countries are looking at things like voucher systems or tax relief for those in employment, but also some sort of learning accounts, which the French are now looking at, so that the person takes their learning account with them regardless of which employer they're with, or if they become unemployed, they could use what's on their account. So it's an important time for developing the financial aspect, I think, of the policy. And then, of course, evaluation, because as I said at the beginning, that's an underlying priority for our work in adult learning as well, that we need evidence that, you know, if we do introduce some of these ideas and some of these procedures, that they bring the right results for the individual, because we shouldn't just continue them because they're the policy, but, you know, if they prove to be good, then we can continue, but if they don't, then we have to do some changes in the policy. So I'll just maybe move on then to there were council conclusions adopted then in May as a result of what the countries had reported back. And so the member states agreed that this is a useful exercise, that, I mean, there's still a lot of support for upskilling pathways. And I think the idea is that we take now those people who need upskilling most, but that the procedure that we have for assessing skills, giving them the flexible learning they need, and regularly validating their skills and competences, this could be applied to adults in general, you know, when we get the system going. But it needs a coherent strategic approach to basic skills, first of all, so that everybody has the necessary skills to continue to learn throughout their lives. And it also needs a holistic approach, because as I was saying, there are various different little programs and initiatives there, and they're often run by different stakeholders. And if we're to bring them all together in a sustainable way and in a strategic way, then we need a lot of partnership and coordination and working together in order to offer these adults the best solution for their learning. And the Council also underlined that it's important to look at people in employment, so it's also important to work with employers and try to support SMEs, especially even to bring the awareness to their employees that they haven't got a job for life, they haven't got skills for life, so they really need to engage in lifelong learning and in upskilling and reskilling, and that they have to make sure that that they have basic skills and key competences to sustain their employability and their participation in society. And I mean, the member states also agree that this three-step approach is useful, and that the tailored or individual learning needs as identified in a skills assessment is a good basis for offering learning opportunities, and it can also be informed then by the evidence we have of what the labour market needs in the region or in the locality. And then, of course, again, this emphasis on outreach and awareness raising and guidance and evaluating the impact. And of course, the cross-sectoral cooperation and coordination. So this is something I think that's developing around the European Agenda for Adult Learning and through the national coordinators. So hopefully that can be sustained and developed into the future. And also the opportunities for exchange of good practice, for mutual learning, for peer learning, that the agenda has offered to the adult learning sector. I think it's important as well that we maintain that and develop it more. And of course as well the Council felt that tools such as EPALE were important in disseminating our work and information and so on. And I won't go into that, but there are a number of funding, apart from the Erasmus Plus, which you know well, and the European Social Funds. There are a number of other grants and funding sources that we hope to use more in the future for adult learning. And just briefly to give you feedback from the working group on adult learning, who've been looking at the success of the agenda over the past, since 2009, and sort of taking stock. I mean, there were 4 main objectives now since 2015, and they were improving governance and coherence in the system, because we have a very fragmented adult learning systems in the countries, and but they feel that through the agenda there are some developments taking place now, and also that there's an increasing supply and take-up of is also there is some movement there, as there is in access, and indeed in the flexibility of the provision available. And of course, guidance as well has always been underlying all of this work. So they would agree that it's still work in progress, but there is some signs of movement and progress. And on the policy level, that the policymakers are more aware now of the sector, and the policy area has broadened. But of course, this fragmentation still exists. So working together, partnership, cooperation, this is really at the heart of what we'll need to do in the future. And just to say that, of course, we're still waiting for our new commissioners to take their seats and to tell us how they see the letters they received from Frau von der Leyen. But in our DG, we have the European Pillar of Social Rights. And of course, the first principle is that everybody has the right to quality and inclusive education, training, and lifelong learning. So I think, you know, this is going to be our Bible for the future, and adult learning will certainly be a strong element of trying to produce on this principle. So thank you very much for your invitation and for your attention, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Hvala lepa, gospa Ní Cheallaigh, za izčrpno predstavitev dogajanja na evropski ravni. Morda kakšno vprašanje iz publike za gospo? We have one question.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to hear your thoughts about how to, if you have any maybe idea or your own thoughts of how to put adult education more high on the agenda, because in fact we all agree that it's something that concerns us all, but still when we look, if I look for the Erasmus Plus, for example, budgets, it's always the other sectors that are more in front line for the funding. And also how to get more benefits from the other sectors into the adult education. Because, I mean, the target groups that adult education has are all very challenging. I mean, so we are trying to stimulate those that anyway have their own existence problems. So, and if I look here, the hashtag, the power and joy of learning, I mean, if we don't stimulate this still in the, let's say, young kids, when they are still happy and joyful through their lives, and we try to stimulate this in the period when you already have some difficulties in how to, I don't know, find a job or something. I mean, we cannot persuade them because, I mean, you have to, I don't know, to struggle how you will survive, how you will feed your kids or so on. So how we could maybe, I don't know, make this loop or take the advantage maybe also from other sectors to put this together and to stimulate this learning that you want to see in adults, that I think it's very challenging, but in a way we all agree that it's probably one of the most important sectors because it covers really the majority of our lives, but still when you look at how the maybe policies are supporting or the national or European, it's still other ways around. So maybe just your reflection on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you gave the answer yourself in that you connected to other areas, and for me, I think that's the key. That because not only is adult learning fragmented, but it's got its finger in a lot of different pies. Not only in education, because of course you could say that higher education must also serve adults. Vocational training must continue to train adults when they have finished their initial vet. But then there are also the connections, for instance, at the moment I think an important window might be around the environment and climate change. Because even if a person is not very interested in learning, well, maybe they're interested in saving the planet, and I mean you need skills for that as well, and you need skills at work because if you're working in the construction industry or something, you have to change how you work and the materials you use. But even if it's only in your daily life, you also have to start sorting your rubbish. So I think, sometimes the way into learning is not by just knocking on the door and saying you have to learn. It's maybe you need another crusade to piggyback on, and that might be one of them. But it's similar. I think we need to do a lot more with our colleagues in health ministries and so on, because we know that the people who learn are likely to be healthier, they're likely to live longer, and also a lot of the work on Alzheimer's shows that if you're using your mind constructively, that maybe delays it. So in these areas, I think we should be working a lot more, but it goes back to the problem of coordination and the problem of partnership. And these are the two trickiest, I think, things in policy making, but also they're time consuming. And of course, people tend to stay in their silos and, do what's easiest. But I think we really need to start moving outside that. Because also we could maybe then pool resources, because we have small pots of money maybe for migrant education and so on, but if we were working more closely with them, it's another source. And sometimes maybe it's not always the money, because I think changing attitudes and also I think if we can maybe persuade employers that it's important, and if they pass the message on to their employees, well then we have maybe, I don't know how many it is, but a large section of the adult population who could maybe move into this mindset change. And I think, for their businesses and so on, they're beginning to realize now that it's not, there are no more jobs for life, and we have to really work on learning.
We have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Dobar dan. Dobar dan svima. Ja sam Regijska iz Crne Gore, Centar za stručno obrazovanje. Biće vjerovatno problem prevod moje priče, više je komentar neki moj utisak. Pa, evo, nadam se da ću uspjeti da prevedim. Ja samo želim da kažem da smo nekako prethodnih decenija isključivo gledali čovjeka kao nekog za tržište rada. I mislim da je to najveći problem koji se sada pokazuje, to je rezultat toga. I još uvijek po meni previše pričamo o tržištu rada. Šta traži tržište rada? Naravno da je to bitno, ali ne smijemo da zapostavimo tu neku humanističku koncepciju obrazovanja i da posmatramo čovjeka kao jednu integralnu ličnost, šta mu sve treba. Smatram da poslodavci jako malo razmišljaju uopšte o profesionalnom i ličnom razvoju svojih zaposlenih, tako da je neophodno da mi od mladih naraštaja, sada već govorimo o cjeloživotnom učenju, razmišljamo i damo ljudima ono što im treba i kao ličnostima, a ne samo kao ljudima koji služe tržištu rada. Na taj način će oni na taj način će oni biti mnogo spretniji, a mi ćemo imati mnogo pismenije građane i Evrope, a naravno posebno našeg Balkana. Eto toliko. Mislim da tu ulogu obrazovanja, posebno obrazovanja odraslih, moramo da osnažimo, da tu nekako poruku ističemo i da je bitno tržište rada, ali bitno je da ne zaboravimo čovjeka u svemu času.
No, that's certainly true, and in a way, in the adult learning agenda, we've concentrated more on working with your associations, with ministries for education. But I think you cannot divide the two, because more and more you see that what people are being asked for in the workplace is very similar to what the skills they need in life. You know, that the employer is saying we need a person with good communication skills, good social skills, who can read and write, and the technical skills to use the machine or whatever, that we can give them on the job. So that's not really what we're trying to ensure. But certainly a lot of the innovations in countries, it's also about learning in the community, and in particular for those people who are have disengaged with learning, to, as you say, to try and give them the courage to start again, to empower them, to recognize that they have skills even though they might have problems as well and learning needs. And a lot of the returning to work, returning to learning is about building self-confidence and self-esteem in the individual, certainly.
Še zadnje vprašanje, potem pa nadaljujemo s aktivnostjo.
Thank you for that. Hopefully I'm going to be short. Regarding to this principle, I would like to just maybe have your opinion, because you have some insights and maybe background information about it. But anyway, I have read all of these letters from the President of the Commission, the new one to all the commissioners and also vice presidents. And I found out only once it was mentioned lifelong learning. And I think that I heard maybe once or twice adult learners. Everything else was something different. So I'm a bit concerned that adult learning is not on the high topic of agenda. So I would like to hear your opinion about it. Thank you.
Well, of course, the letters are still pending, all of the interviews at the Parliament next week. But I mean, it's an attempt at a new organization, I suppose. But I wouldn't be too worried about the words, because if you think about it that way, well then training doesn't appear at all. So if you found 2 hits for adults or learners, then perhaps it's more positive than for some other areas. But I think that, one of the things that, for instance, the Commissioner designate Schmidt has to do is to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. So it will be up to member states and to the people helping him then, of course, to say that it's a lifelong learning perspective. And I think that there is a move towards more adults. It's probably called adult skills or reskilling for adults or upskilling for adults, but I certainly think there is an acknowledgement that there is not enough of it, and that it has to be increased.
Hvala lepa. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
answering the question.